From the 1980s to 1990s, a school of thought reached the zenith of its reach. Its influence had become international. Having been the view of only a minority little more than 20 years previously, this approach had triumphed in dominating its discipline at all leading universities in the world. Academics that did not accede to it found it hard to continue a career. Obtaining jobs or moving up the ladder in academic circles depended on publications in leading journals, which was usurped by this particular school of thought. Obvious dominance in academia was merely a cornerstone of much wider reaching influence. A large number of prominent national and international bureaucrats, journalists, politicians, and other opinion makers had either been trained in the discipline or had otherwise become its followers. As a result, the views proposed by it came to dominate public policy debate by communities, companies, the nation, and the international community. A dominance by this key school of economics is nefariously intertwined with politics, to the detriment of politicians and economists alike. The volcanic rise can be seen to have been spurred by a particular need for Western political unity towards the latter years of the Cold War. This far-reaching school of thought is better known by its key tenets than by its name. Its key beliefs are that the pursuit of individual self-interest will lead to a better society, that government intervention beyond the narrow maintenance of law and order should be minimised if not eliminated, and that the powers of unfettered markets should be unleashed in virtually every part of society, at home and abroad. For this purpose, structural reforms are recommended to deregulate, liberalise, privatise, and open up as many industries and aspects of the economy as possible, as the beneficial forces of the invisible hand, if only allowed to operate freely, would improve people's lives, create wealth, produce prosperity, and lead to maximum happiness. The name of this school impacting the world's billions is less well known: NeoClassical economics. This may have to do with its somewhat obscure or technical ring. It is also testimony to the extent of its dominance. Proponents are often no longer aware that there could be an alternative school of thought. To them, neoclassical economics is synonymous with modern economics per se. Most economics programs at universities consist entirely of neoclassical economics, and students can spend years studying for their degrees without becoming aware that they may have been studying just one particular branch, one of many schools of thought in the discipline of economics. The financial press cites neoclassical ideas on a daily basis, and its followers have entered highest public office. Central bankers are among the first profession to have been closely associated with neoclassical economics. This was followed by financial journalists and civil servants. As a result, the tune of deregulation, liberalisation, and privatisation is played daily, and offered almost as a panacea, a cure if you like, to many of the world's ills. In the early 2000s, many Western economies were promoting the need for the last publicly held state companies to be sold off. This can be seen with railways in Britain, airlines in Britain, France and Germany, and nearly every large company in Russia. The Financial Times warned in 2003 that the German economy will stagnate unless the country seeks privatisation, deregulation and liberalisation. It was said state-dominated firms needed to be sold off, as in the US and Britain, for the health of the nation. The labour market needed to become more flexible. This means that employment protection must be abandoned and staff should be laid off, while remaining ones are made to feel they may be next. Reforms of the social security and healthcare systems to reduce ballooning costs are needed, which often is to say that the lifelong contributors to these systems should be denied the agreed payouts. Paul Samuelson, a key free market economist, whose textbooks are taught across the globe and have contributed to the advancement of modern economics, reaffirms that free markets are the key to prosperity. Neoclassical economists have moved beyond appointments of central bank governors, ministers and secretaries. They have become prime ministers, such as Spain's former Prime Minister Aznar, or presidents such as Peru's former Toledo. In these positions of influence, they have done much to advance the policy programme of the neoclassical school. Anyone who has lived in one of the world's less developed countries, the vast majority of the world's population, also has opportunity to experience the neoclassical policy agenda. Neoclassical economics has dominated the decisions of the large international organisations that deal with economic policy. Among them, regional development banks, the IMF, the World Bank, the BIS, the WTO, its predecessor, as well as the OECD, stand out. Early on, these institutions had focused on hiring and advancing the careers of adherents of the neoclassical school of thought. Already by the late 1970s, they had become bastions of neoclassical economics. Their policy advice reflected this. Thanks to the legal, financial and political muscle of these institutions, especially the IMF and the World Bank, the neoclassical free market economics was projected beyond a few industrialized countries, where it was developed and made its mark on the world by affecting the lives of billions of people right to the corners of the earth. In over 100 countries, central bank policies, IMF-led structural adjustment programs, and development bank-led reform packages drastically changed fiscal policy, monetary policy, regulatory policy, and many aspects of how societies are organised, each time along the neoclassical lines. This could be cutting food subsidies for the financially weak, or privatising the supply of drinking water, allowing foreign stockholders investment opportunity, thus often pricing the poor out of their water supply, or more commonly their own domestically produced commodities. The neoclassical policy agenda was usually supported by the US Treasury, which did much to advance the neoclassical consensus of the Washington-based international organisations. Wherever the World Bank and the IMF became active, most of the developing world, they soon seemed to know the true problems of each country. Little local research was needed to reach their conclusions. The fall of communism in the late 1980s provided another major boost to the already dominant neoclassical school of thought. Commentators held this evidence that government intervention must be inefficient, and only free markets would lead to dominant economic success. There was even talk of the end of history, from economists to analysts, as a paradigm of free market capitalist economies with minimal government intervention now stood unopposed and without rival. Free market economists were in great demand as well-paid advisors to the governments of transition economies, where they duly recommended shock therapy, the simultaneous introduction of free markets in almost all industries.